or the potential dangers that we may face here in Dallas County, that was not necessarily a failure of government. That was a failure of the people relying too much on government. And that's kind of an odd thing to say, but when you look at the cities that first have seen these great waves of crisis, Seattle and San Francisco, they long ago have given up their third spaces, if you will, right? There are clearly spaces in our communities that the government or the rule of law owns, right? Locked down. Community centers like this, but for the longest time in human history, and particularly in urban areas, the third places, the street corners, the streets around marketplaces, were informally policed by caring citizens, people that felt like they owned that area. And the typical vignette would be to see a kid racing down the street in 1880s New York City with a shopkeeper pulling him out before he gets run over by a horse cart. Now, fast forward to the 1950s, you still had a lot of that same Main Street ethos where that shopkeeper would lay hands on a kid and pull him out from getting killed, essentially, or stop him from breaking something. How many of you think today that a shopkeeper would ever lay hands on a kid in our town center here in Coppell? How many think that? Raise your hand if you think that would happen. No, of course not. We don't police ourselves. We have lost our communities. That's a fact. That's not to say that is not necessarily entirely conservative or a liberal phenomenon. It is what has happened because of an over-reliance in government to a certain respect, but I will equally place blame on, as soon as that space was opened up, there has been, over probably since the 60s, a great deal of over-policing and militarization of policing, where we got a false sense of security behind the guys on the SWAT team. They're gonna solve all the problems. Well, they can kick down a door and make a drug raid, but they sure as hell can't stop that kid from committing his first crime, right? That has to be stopped by the shopkeeper that stops the 12-year-old from doing what they're doing when they're acting impulsively. Parents need to be there as well, right? There's still plenty of blame to spread around that, but there's plenty of parents that are in a hard situation, two working households, and there used to be more informal networks of making sure that our neighborhoods stayed safe. So I'll say that it takes more than one or two steps for us to get to this point in Seattle and San Francisco. But we're not doing the right things to reverse it. If you don't appropriately diagnose the problem, which is the problem of the third spaces, and intervening in our communities, and knowing our neighbors, and knowing the people across the way, and being willing to stop the kid from running outside the street. And that's the most telling thing, right? And these are, I know you're all good people. If you saw someone dying on the street, you would do something. What's the first thing you would do? Call an ambulance, call the police, right? Some people, though, would be afraid to directly intervene. You would call, right? You'd call first, but then stop the bleeding. Some folks, some well-meaning folks, because of all types of fears, may not intervene when time is most critical. And in many instances, I know that's kind of hard to say, but there's sometimes you could see a situation where you'd be justified, where you'd say, I don't, there's a seizure going on, but you don't know if it's drug related or not. There could be a number of things going on that you're not necessarily going to jump into that situation. That's a failure in our communities, right? To know the people. I mean, when we live in communities that are more tight-knit, we probably, someone within earshot may know who this individual is. There are so many people that walk silently through our community that we never know and never will know. And heaven forbid they fall, in peril in the middle of the street. Who are we going to call? The government, right? That is what this failure is about in my mind. And to undo that process, it's not with more police. It's with more connecting each other in the community and relying less on the police. Because when you saw the guy at the upholstery store, the police need to do something about this. Well, yes, but you need, there was a time when you would go out there and say, get out of here. And they would go. because they know the next step would be, proper enforcement, right? So, and also, there is potentially, there'd be 5 shopkeepers alongside you that'll say the same thing. How many of them now will just ignore it? My business is my business. People are still coming in and getting their car detailed. People are still coming in and ordering their framing. I'm not going to worry with them. What if one of them goes off and goes and messes up my car? No, you're not going to intervene. So we're, as communities, not necessarily doing our part, and the real danger is when we over-rely on policing, because then we see the pendulum swing that happened in both Seattle and San Francisco. The police are now, completely overwhelmed. Thank you. Overwhelmed. They can't do everything. They can't intervene in all these situations. So what eventually happens, the nadir of it is right there. They give up. Only the most important calls. If someone's dead, we're going to show up. What's happening in Dallas right now? That's the decision. That is the core of the decision that John Creuzot thought he was making. I'm saving everyone by saving our resources because our resources are limited. We're already seeing that pullback that can lead to what happened in these more liberal places. So I'm not going to give you the rosy picture that we can't be San Francisco, we can't be Seattle. Because if we follow on that same, all right, we're using the resources just for that piece, we lose. And those things will start to happen. And you see some of it in downtown Dallas. Those camps are not, most of the mentally ill folks, we've done a number of the censuses, large portion that are drug addicted, with an overlap in those with mental health issues. Some are medicating, so they're kind of in both camps, if you will. And there's also another large body that we usually call the silent prison. Individuals who have committed a felony, not necessarily a sex offense, but they've committed a felony, and there's no way they're going to be able to rent an apartment or get a job, right? And for those of us in politics, it is extremely unpopular to say, those guys that have a felony and a strong back, they're the low-hanging fruit. If we got them a job and a place to stay, they'd be fine. No one wants to go and say, well, you know what? I'm going to first help felons rather than those that are mentally ill or those with drug and alcohol dependencies, right? So, I mean, these are some of the most difficult issues. So if you allow government to solve these problems, even well-intentioning individuals like myself, and I believe myself to be well-intentioned, but I good and well know, if this gets to a crisis stage and government has to do something, there's necessarily going to be overriding effects that cause some problem down the line that is an unforeseen consequence that can end up being worse than the initial intervention, like what you're seeing in San Francisco and Seattle. Good-intentioned liberals like Reagan, so much of what they know is not true. So much of what they know about human nature is not true, and they got themselves in this situation. So we're going to have to work, it's not sexy, but we're going to have to do the hard and slow work of doing our role in building back up our communities and meeting police and law enforcement folks halfway. So that I probably spent too much time on my stomach.
There's one group, I know this for a fact, that you left out.
What's that?
The homeless. My ex-wife, started a homeless shelter in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It gets no government funding, raises the money and so forth. The majority of the people that come to her are people that were one paycheck or one disaster away from losing everything.
Right.
All right, let me finish.
Sure.
She runs a faith-based religious homeless shelter. People come in, families, males, females, all separated. 3 times a week, a bus comes, takes them for job interviews. If they don't do that, they're gone.
Sure.
Second thing is unannounced drug testing. If you get caught with drugs, you're leaving. No government money. Those folks are the ones that can be rescued.
Right.
Those are the folks that haven't committed a felony. Those are the folks that are, and here's the other thing that's very interesting.
And here's where I probably wasn't specific enough. When you talk about chronic homelessness, those are largely the camps. The one paycheck away person that self-selects, they say, I'm gonna find my way to get this thing better, that goes to and follows the rules in a place like that, they're necessarily gonna get out of it at some point, and they do. And we see that all the time. So they may churn through, and they still represent a quarter, but they don't
Sometimes.
stay there.
Sometimes.
I disagree.
The last, this is a real life experience. The other part of this that is very, very interesting is that some of these folks are not just local. They come from other parts of the country. There's 3 churches that support her, and they bring a bus over, and they get a good meal, and so forth and so on. So there's reward for behavior. People get jobs through this whole process. But here's something that a lot of people don't appreciate, is these people that have lost their car or their home, their job, the vast majority of Americans think these people are just drug addicts, they're just drunks and so forth. That is a secondary effect of them losing their job. To remove the pain, they get hooked on drugs or they start drinking. It's not the reverse.
Okay, I'm gonna give Chad an opportunity to talk from a law enforcement perspective as well.
All right.
And then we'll do Q&A after that. Chad Prda.
Yes. Chad Prda. Do I need this? Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
I don't do good with microphones. I tend to make them squeal. Chad Prda. I've been with the Sheriff's Department for about 16 years now. Been in law enforcement the most of my career-based life. Seattle and San Francisco. This video covers Seattle, and it kind of touched on San Francisco being topping the charts. That's because San Francisco went first. What we see with cities that do this, there's something called UCR. It is a statistic that all law enforcement agencies report, and we are roughly 2 years behind on reporting because of the in-depth nature that it is. Race, sex, date of birth, age, number of victims, relationship to victim, what type of weapon, it's everything. You can sit down on a UCR spreadsheet and you can pull up every statistic you can imagine for an area's crime results. We will have to wait 2 years before we start to see the ramifications of these changes. What I can tell you, the cities that have done this and they did not do it the correct way, such as Seattle or San Francisco, everything doubled. The lower base-end crimes, they fell off. The murder rates, the drug use, the human trafficking, the homeless population, rapes, it doubled. Almost overnight, and people go, oh my God, how did it happen? Part of that is the third area, the community. We've lost our community. But what we've started doing is we have an entire generation that has come up that has learned that I don't owe you respect, you owe me respect. And you don't have to listen to the police. You don't have to listen to that person. You only have to listen to what you want. Part of that attitude is what generated some of this. And you know, specifically talking about why we're here, the changes Creuzot made. I heard Creuzot speak, and he heard from law enforcement, and he fielded a lot of questions. One thing that he said struck me as, this is the problem. When he was talking to us, and he said that us being law enforcement, he said that a lot of people in the room would disagree with the changes he's done. But a lot of people throughout the county would agree with him. And those people all have one thing in common. It starts with a V and it ends with an E. When we actually start doing things just for votes, we cause a problem. His theft, $750 for necessity items. Tell me how you dictate what's a necessity item. I need a guitar to make ends meet. I'm a musician. It's a necessity. We don't get to write legislation. When the program started, I have a program that I want to do. First offense drugs. And across the board, first offense drugs. Take marijuana. Talk to any cop, we hate dealing with it. Especially the low end stuff. We like the big ones. We like the semi-truck fools. We like the cartel levels, the ones that are actually causing a problem. I don't care about little Johnny with a joint. What I wanna do with little Johnny, come here. Come to my class for 3 months. Twice a month for 3 months. At the end of that time period, if you've passed this class, I will cover things like how to talk, how to dress, how to address a boss, why you should show respect. At the end of that 3 month period, I have right now 5 businesses that are willing to do it, that come in and will teach them skills, how to be a chef, how to take care of a yard, to give them skill sets. If it was marijuana, we'll get with the judge, what's a good community service time? That amount of time is how long they have to work. Well, if it's theft, however much they stole, 20% of their paycheck goes to the victim. Once they complete it, it's never filed. Right now, if I arrest someone and send it up to the DA and they don't prosecute, well, it was still filed, you still went to jail, you still bonded out, you still did all this other stuff, and it's still held against you. Let's give them the tools that they need to come out of it. By just releasing someone back into the wild, we reinforce the negative behavior of stealing is okay, and teach them, don't go get a job, just go take what you want. Let's teach them how to get a job and be a contribution to society. So it's not reinforced negative. Some of the other things, his deal with 0.1 gram. It's a usable amount. And in theory, it was good. What that does is, first time offenders, it's a state jail felony. And there's only a handful of times that the Texas Penal Code say you shall do something, and they pretty much all revolve around felonies and family violence. Any other time, they don't tell me I have to do something, but I have to arrest for a felony. It's a felony to possess a usable amount of heroin, methamphetamines, most narcotics, and fentanyl. But now the DA won't prosecute more than 0.1 gram. It has to be higher than that. Otherwise, it was just a usable amount because of testing and it's a residue in the bag. 0.1 gram of fentanyl will kill every living person in this room. It is a terrifying drug. That was a reaction that wasn't thought through. I'm not saying undo everything, but we need to really start thinking about stuff. As an officer, I swore an oath. As a prosecutor, he swears an oath. As a defense attorney, you swear an oath. I don't get to write legislation. The right way to do this is to go through and change the legislation at that level. The moment an officer, an attorney, a judge, we start taking our personal bias and we start saying, you know what, I don't believe in that law, I'm not gonna follow through with it. We pretty much trashed everything this system works for. I should be able to stand up in court and testify that yes, I've done everything by the book honorably and I followed every rule. That's kind of why we're here. That's why people respect officers, judges, lawyers, defense attorneys, or divorce attorneys. Personal injury, yeah. But what we're doing right now, when we teach kids they don't have to respect officers, what we see in Seattle, those officers are overrun, right? It's because it's also not illegal to hit a cop and resist.
In Seattle?
Yes.
It's not illegal?
It is not illegal.
The law, is that the law or is that the
That's that
DA there
They
saying that
won't
that's
prosecute it unless it's serious bodily injury.
But that's not the
Because,
case in Texas, right?
no, it's across the board, that is not the case. But they're overrun in Seattle because they reached that point that, well, there's too many assault on officers cases, so let's lower the bar. And they made it less legal. It has to be serious
Insanity.
bodily injury. To get serious bodily injury, you have to create a permanent disfigurement or a change, a broken bone, a scar, death. It has to be permanent. Well, a lot of what changed on that was they looked at it as officers sign up for this. And we did. I signed up to stand between normal society and the evil that knocks on your door. But I didn't sign up for no backing. And right now, that's why officers are leaving Dallas. That's why they're leaving Dallas County. When I say Dallas, I'm actually referring to the county. DPD is a city and it's got issues all unto itself. A lot of that stems from their retirement, mismanagement, and no backing. Dallas County, same thing. But officers are leaving law enforcement because we don't get backing from the state. We don't get backing from administration because they're too worried about votes. What we need is not a militarization. I guarantee you, you won't find an officer out there, well, there's a handful of them, the 5'11" glasses, that like putting on that SWAT gear. I wore 87 pounds extra gear whenever I had my SWAT attire on. That sucks in Texas in August. Would much rather wear my blues. They're pretty. I got all these medals up here. They look nice. They're starched. They're, you know, back.
Officer said, people come here.
What do you think of as an officer? I hated having to wear that SWAT gear because when I put that on, that means something bad is fixing to happen. I'm fixing to kick a door and I may not go home. But we need to back them. There is a need for it. Law enforcement's reactive. We're not proactive. We didn't just decide one day we need military gear. No, we kicked the door and ran in on a cartel house and said, yeah, we're outgunned. So we started adapting it. What we're doing now is we're tying officers' hands, we're pulling those tools away from them, but we're still expecting them to do their old job. Well, we're gonna lose officers at an amazing rate. We already don't get paid. And right now, the hard part, I ask my daughter, have your first steps without me being there. Have your Christmases without me being there. Sorry, sweetie, I have to leave your birthday party. I know it just started, but daddy gotta go. No, we can't discuss what I do with your friends because their parents might not like it. We already ask a lot of our families.
Eye-opening.
Now you're asking to have zero backing from the courts. It takes me anywhere from 2 hours to 2 years to file a case. The district attorney's office, when I file a drug case, what they're not looking at is that little marijuana case. But that person that we arrested for marijuana on his first offense, we're not tracking. There's no record, right? He never got prosecuted. He never got put into the system. So when his second offense comes up, hey, this is just the first offense. There's no record. We still have to have accountability. We still have to do it a right way. I'm not saying completely undo everything he does, but we've got to back our officers and we've got to do it with more thought, more personal accountability, and more protection of the victim. I didn't sign up to have Walmart pull out of 2 stores in Dallas County because I can't prosecute the thefts fast enough. And Walmart's already pulled out of 2 stores. Seattle's coming. We have to get a handle on it now and real fast. If we don't, we're gonna be minus officers, and then to recover from that will take such a force that we don't have the capabilities anymore. We're barely staying above water right now. If we lose control, it's gone forever.
Is it time for Q&A?
Well,
Yes.
maybe the second part would be, all right, we've given you the bad news, how about the good news? What can be done?
How to?
Yeah, so, to go back to that chart, one of the places where property crime was very low was the NYPD, was New York. So I was fortunate enough, after my first year of law school, to be a mayor's intern for the NYPD, got a chance to work with the Deputy Commissioner of Trials. So that's their internal courts, discipline for their 30,000 sworn and unsworn folks. The NYPD was on the cutting edge of CompStat and essentially analyzing stats and responding to them appropriately and really testing things. They also, working with Rudy Giuliani, did work toward community policing in such a way where they were really working under the broken windows theory. Now, some folks have discredited portions of the broken windows theory, and I still think there's a lot viable in there because we're inviting people that live there to own the streets again.
Can you explain what the broken window theory is?
Broken windows theory basically is that you have a broken window, you see that this neighborhood is starting to be run down. What do? One of two things. If you have enough money, you split. If you don't, you hide at home, right? You go from where you work, right in the house. You don't stand outside. Why? Because things are starting to go downhill. And it ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. As soon as people start to recede because they see signs of there's some thugs on the corner, instead of calling them out and you gotta go, I know your mama, they're still out there. Now they own the street. Now things fall apart, there's graffiti because they own the street. No one else is watching after them, no one else is calling the cops. So you allow that to happen by intervening in a forceful way and making sure that you have cops coming in and you have code enforcement folks with essentially a cop not too far away. So if someone starts to give them trouble about the broken windows or the problem, then the police are going to show up. And if it's code enforcement, you have a district attorney or county attorney, depending on what the agency is, coming behind quickly and citing the heck out of them on those code pieces. Listen, if this rent house has 5 windows busted out, and we've had 3 arrests here, and according to code, you can't be running a X, Y, and Z. You hammer them, you get rid of the bad landlords, and eventually, by that hard work and inviting the community into it. Here's the thing: you can do all that hard work, and you can kick out a bad landlord, and one will come in to replace him, to eventually be a slumlord again, right? So you've got to make sure that behind that, and that was Giuliani administration's to attack, push them back, and sweep folks in. So a lot of times you would have bad landlords, you'd restructure some of the rents, you could keep some rent controlled, you could take some Section 8 vouchers and so forth, but essentially do a lot of teachers and cops. They had a lot of programs where teachers and police officers could get lower rates on mortgages for certain banking entities backed by the city to bring people into those neighborhoods to stabilize the neighborhoods. That's a lot of government, right? Particularly for a Republican like Rudy Giuliani. So you're in a much better position if you don't get to that point where you have to take back a neighborhood. You're in a much better situation where you get out in front of some of the code violations and problems there. So how did New York do it? Well, in part they had a large amount of gentrification, right? So after 9/11, a lot of people left, but then when the financial industry started to regroup, people felt as though they wanted to live closer, and particularly because prices were depressed, they were allowed to. So a number of places on the island of Manhattan, which wasn't typically safe from tip to tip. I mean, nowadays there's a gap in Harlem. Like, there was a time when you had to sprint through Spanish Harlem to get to the next subway or you were in big trouble. That's not there anymore. They have the unique ability to police a little bit more efficiently because your people per square foot is greater than almost any place in the world. So one black and white, rolling around the block, or one cop on foot can essentially police effectively 30,000 folks because they're answering a call 5 feet away, right? So for urban areas, taking advantage of density and policing those areas efficiently is the first step, rather than what Creuzot is presenting. I mean, he's essentially making an economic argument. He's making it under the guise of, I'm helping the African American community because they are the individuals that are disproportionately arrested and the poor. Certainly making that poor argument. But this retreat, he also says in the same breath, it's because we have to save our resources for the bad guys. And the bad guys are in fact still there. The problem is that retreat invites more chaos that'll lead to more of the larger bad guys, and as you've seen with the doubling that happens in other places. New York didn't buy into that argument. They doubled down on making sure they can effectively police the areas that are already dense, and then they also worked with government to make sure that the development that was going on is something that can be sustainable. You don't want certain types of tear out 5 blocks and then build this mega thing or whatever. If it's for the ultra wealthy, great, because they take care of themselves. If it's essentially someone that wants to buy or create a $50 billion low-income housing without any idea of where jobs are going to come from or anything like that, and somehow we're going to subsidize this to the federal government, you've essentially created a housing project without the ability to get resources around it. So New York was very, particularly on the island of Manhattan, they were very intentional regarding where they were going to. There used to be the NIMBY problem. You put the projects on this area of the island. Instead, as those got torn down, redevelopment happened, you spread things out a little bit more because then you have communities that are around them, there's more jobs around them, and there's just more normalizing with, the regular folks.
Judge, I was in New York pre and post Giuliani. I got the impression that the reason you had redevelopment and gentrification, and Times Square is probably the best example,
Yeah.
is because they stopped the crime.
Yeah.
Stopping the crime brought in the investment, and that's what changed everything. Not only in Times Square, but Soho, all over the island.
Yeah, well, it was that intentional advance. It was working with code, working with cops, a block at a time, and as soon as you secure one, you make it a lot more attractive, just like you see in the M streets where I live.
Yeah.
One block all of a sudden, has a bunch of new houses, they're all jazzed up. That $20,000 lot is no longer $20,000.
Right.
That is now $100,000 because the developer wants to be by all those other folks. And that's that same follow-on effect. But it becomes important that the knee-jerk isn't just, we're gonna police the hell out of this and make it happen.
Well, you got
It's not that
It's
easy.
not safe. No one's gonna live there.
Right.
No one's gonna invest.
Exactly.
That
But
is- that is number one.
Absolutely, but it's really important. Say Scott Griggs right now. Scott Griggs in Dallas County, or so in the city of Dallas, is
Yeah.
campaigning solely on, we need more cops, we need more cops. That's nice, Scott. That's step one of
Yeah.
10. And the next one needs to be coherent code policy and enforcement with your city attorneys. Then you need to have, a real plan regarding development. Because if you let the developers do what they want, they're gonna do it for their own interests, and perhaps that'll end up to some areas that are difficult to police, to say the least. But you can, if you do the right things, and encourage the right type of growth, it becomes a heck of a lot easier to police and also not worry about some of the other.
Well, this is
expansions.
obviously going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, no, and so we're making the same mistakes as Seattle and San Francisco, rather than taking some of the lessons from other dense urban areas like New York, like Charlotte. Charlotte had some real problems along a lot of areas, and it wasn't all gentrification. It wasn't all just a bunch of people, rich folks moving in. It was stabilizing some of those schools. You get some good middle class folks. You get some poorer folks that are moving in from other areas, and now you have a nice mix, that healthy American mix that we always saw, where you really see that. The wonderful thing about urban areas is because, if you're poor, there's a lot of places to get a job, and if you get a job, you got a shot, you can make it to middle management, and then something else, and you move up those lines. Tougher to do in rural areas, tougher, maybe a little easier in suburban areas, but, cities really are where those opportunities are. Another thing with Seattle and San Francisco, they are both barbell cities. You are a billionaire, and you have locked yourself essentially in a tower or someplace gated
Behind the wall.
and then there's everyone else, right?
Yep.
That's always dangerous for political involvement and the real politic, right? Because then it's just a bunch of the poor and a bunch of the rich, and no one gets it right ever. I mean,
And the middle class suffers.
yeah, the canary in the coal